Welcome, everyone. Ready to dive into the world of Mexican comic books. We're going to explore how these historietas, that's what they call them in Spanish, how they reflect Mexican society,
hmm
values and all that, and how they've changed over time.
It's true. They really are more than just like colorful stories. It's like looking right into the heart of Mexican culture.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing the sheer volume of comics they make and read in Mexico. I had no idea. Did you know that for a while? Like, it was the biggest producer and the consumer of comic books per person in the whole world.
Yeah, fascinating, right? To really get it, we got to go back to after the Mexican Revolution when things settled down. The country, kind of found its footing, the economy was growing, and the government really pushed literacy programs so everyone was reading. Perfect time for comics to like explode.
Like all the stars aligned or something. But before we get to the golden age of Mexican comics, let's rewind back to the beginning. Where these stories even come from?
Well, like a lot of comic traditions, Mexican comics, they started with political cartoons. They used humor and satire, sharp wit, to comment on current events.
So like a way for people to understand what was happening around them.
Exactly. Now, here's a fun one. Back in the 1880s, cigarette companies like El Buen Tono, they used to put little comic strips in their packs as a marketing thing.
Wow, that's wild. Early content marketing, huh? So who were these early comic characters?
Well, one of the big ones, his name was Don Chipito Marguanero Charrasca y Rascarabias, a mouthful, right? And he wasn't some superhero, more like a relatable guy, kind of flawed, like the blueprint for the everyman characters you see later on.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I can picture him like a lovable rascal just trying to get by.
That's it. And these early comics, people would read them alongside things like corridos.
Corridos. For those who might not know, what are those exactly?
Oh, they're traditional Mexican ballads, kind of like folk songs telling stories of heroes, outlaws, that kind of thing. They've been around for centuries.
Wow, so it's storytelling through music, a rich tradition.
Yeah.
So these early comics were part of that bigger picture of cultural expression.
Absolutely. And from those roots, Mexican comics really started to develop into their own unique art form.
Speaking of developing, when do we see the first official Mexican comic book?
Well, there's a bit of debate on which one truly holds that title. Some say it's Adelaido el Conquistador. It came out in 1932, ran for 100 weekly issues.
Wait, 1932, that's 5 years before the first American comic book, right?
Yeah, a lot of people are surprised by that. Then there's Pepin. It ran from 1936 to 1955, and at its peak, it was published 8 times a week. And then there's Paquin from 1934. Some consider that the true first Mexican comic.
Wow, so many contenders. But it's clear there was a huge demand for these stories in Mexico. But with that kind of popularity, did the government ever try to control what was in them?
They did. In 1944, they set up this commission, the Comisión Calificadora de Periódicos y Revistas. Their job was to review newspapers and magazines, basically keep an eye on things. Seems like they were worried about the influence, especially on young people.
So censorship. Did it work?
Not really. Comics were just too popular. Any attempts at censorship kind of fizzled out.
Sounds like they underestimated the power of these stories.
I think so. And as the industry grew, certain characters emerged that became like symbols of Mexican culture.
Which brings us to some of the big names in Mexican comics. Let's start with Lágrimas, Risa y Amor, Tears, Laughter, and Love. This romance comic ran for 40 years.
Amazing, right? It shows how much Mexicans love dramatic storytelling, these big emotions. Lágrimas, Risa y Amor. It showed love, loss, overcoming hardship. People really connected with that.
Yeah, it's universal, but with that distinct Mexican touch.
Exactly. And of course, there's Calimán, the superhero that every Mexican kid grew up with.
Oh yeah, Kalaman, the one with the crazy origin story, right? Raised by Tibetan lamas, learned all these mental and physical powers. He's like James Bond meets a mystical guru.
Haha, that's a good way to put it. It's a cool mix of influences. Even his name, it comes from Kali, the Hindu goddess, and man, following the Superman pattern.
Interesting how he brings in those Eastern influences, but he still feels very Mexican.
What's cool is that Kalaman actually started on the radio in 1963, then jumped to comics in 1965. By the late 70s, estimates say something like 3 to 7% of the entire Mexican population had bought at least one Kalaman comic.
Whoa, that's a massive following. But I think the comic that really gets to the heart of Mexico is La Familia Barón. What do you think?
Oh, absolutely. The Baron family, it's considered the most Mexican comic because it shows the everyday struggles of a working class family, trying to make ends meet,
Yeah, they're not in some fantasy land. They're dealing with real problems: rent, work, raising kids.
Exactly. They live in a vecindad, a kind of apartment complex, very common in Mexico City. Their lives are full of humor, warmth, and this resilience that so many Mexicans identify with.
It feels like a celebration of ordinary people,
Hmm.
their struggles, but also finding joy even when things are tough.
You said it. The creator, Gabriel Vargas, even literary giants praised him for his dialogue, the way he used language, super clever. Some even said he deserved a spot in the Academy of the Spanish language. That's how good his writing was.
Wow, that's impressive.
Mm-hmm.
These comics were more than just entertainment. They were a window into Mexican life, its values, even politics.
Absolutely. And speaking of politics, we can't forget Rios, the cartoonist who used his work for, like, sharp political commentary.
Okay, tell me about Rios.
His real name was Eduardo Del Rio, and he wasn't just a cartoonist, he was a social critic, a historian, a voice for the underdog. He started in magazines in the 50s, then his work appeared in major newspapers all over Latin America.
So he wasn't afraid to, like, shake things up a bit.
Not at all. He created strips like Los Supermachos and Los Agachados, satirical critiques of Mexican leaders and how power worked in society.
Sensing a theme here, using humor to fight injustice.
You got it. Ries's work was so sharp, he even got pressure, even threats from government people who didn't appreciate his satire.
That takes guts. But even beloved characters could cause controversy, right? Like Memon Penguin.
Yeah, Memon Penguin. That's a complicated one. He first appeared in 1943, quickly became a beloved character. He's this Cuban-Mexican kid devoted to his mother, but he's mischievous, and he speaks in this, like, Caribbean slang.
The classic troublemaker with a good heart.
Yeah. But in 2005, when the Mexican Postal Service made commemorative stamps with Memon on them, well, there was an outcry.
Why? What happened?
Some people saw his appearance as racist, stereotypical, and insensitive. It started a big discussion about how cultural sensitivities change and how characters people loved can be seen differently as time goes on.
It shows that cultural icons can be interpreted in so many ways, and values change over time.
Exactly, and this brings us to a bigger point, how Mexican comics have reflected the changing landscape of the country, from the post-revolution era to times of fast urbanization and economic shifts.
Now, this is getting interesting. So, how did these comics show us Mexican society and how its identity was evolving?
Well, let's look at some examples, like La Familia Barón. They weren't in some made-up world. Their struggles, with poverty, trying to find decent work, dealing with life in the city, that was real for a lot of Mexicans.
Yeah, like a mirror reflecting those everyday challenges that so many people face.
Exactly. And then you have Rios using humor to go after the government, expose injustice. His comments got people talking about power, corruption, the need for change.
It's wild how these simple stories could have such a big impact.
That's the power of comics, right? Entertaining and thought-provoking, reaching people in a way other media just can't sometimes.
Makes you wonder how these comics, so tied to Mexican life, compare to comics from other places. Like, do you see the same themes, some characters popping up around the world?
Great question. That takes us into this whole area of comparative comics, It's fascinating. When you put Mexican comics next to ones from other countries, it's like you're peeking into the worries, the dreams, the values of different societies.
A global conversation happening, but through pictures and speech bubbles.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
One thing that jumps out about Mexican comics is this focus on family, like La Familia Barón, right? Family is everything to them, and you see that a lot in Mexican comics.
Yeah, that makes sense with how central family is to Mexican culture. It's their support system, their identity, everything.
Exactly. And that emphasis on family, it's not as strong in, say, American superhero comics. There, it's more about the lone hero battling his own demons, saving the world, that kind of thing.
So different cultures, different heroes, different worries.
Yeah, and different ways of showing emotions. Mexican comics, they really embrace melodrama. Like, they're not afraid to go big with feelings, explore all the messy stuff in relationships.
It's not just action, but that emotional roller coaster the characters go through. Adds a layer of, like, realness.
For sure. And while American comics can be kind of black and white, good versus evil, Mexican comics, there's more gray area. Characters aren't all good or all bad. They're mixed, like real people.
Makes them more human, someone you can relate to.
Right. And let's not forget humor. Mexican comics have this unique sense of humor, often satirical, playful, poking fun at authority. social norms, even themselves.
Like Rios using satire to take on the government.
Exactly. He was amazing at using humor to make a point. And while you see political satire in comics from other places, in Mexico, it has this special flavor, mixing wit with a desire for justice, you know?
So it's not just about laughs, it's about making people think, question things.
Absolutely. Now, when it comes to characters who really capture that Mexican spirit, you got to talk about El Santo. He was a real-life wrestler who became this folk hero, then a comic book icon.
Wait, a wrestler who became a comic book hero?
Yeah.
That's awesome. What kind of stories did he have?
His comics were this crazy mix of wrestling, action, even supernatural stuff. He fought vampires, werewolves, mad scientists, you name it. That blend of real and fantasy, it really hit home with Mexican readers.
Sounds like a character straight out of a dream.
Hmm.
But it's cool how he represents that blurred line between real and fantasy you see in Mexican culture.
It really is. It shows how comics can tap into what a whole culture imagines, create these larger-than-life figures that embody their values, what they hope for.
But these comics weren't just entertainment, were they? They also helped shape how people thought about things, especially during times of change, right?
Totally. Mexican comics reflected the social, political, economic realities of the country. Take the post-revolution era, massive upheaval, everything was being rebuilt.
And comics gave people a way to process it all, make sense of things.
Exactly. They became a platform to explore those changes, question those in power, imagine a better future, gave a voice to people who maybe didn't have one in traditional media.
So a tool for empowerment, for making a statement during a really transitional time.
Exactly. And as Mexico went through these periods of like booming economies and cities growing like crazy, those changes showed up in the comics too. Characters dealing with new problems, moving to the city, financial struggles, trying to keep up with a world that's changing so fast.
Holding up a mirror to society, showing people their own struggles and victories.
You could say that.
Yeah.
And by doing that, they helped shape attitudes, get conversations started, even offer a sense of hope or like, we're in this together during tough times.
I'm curious, how did these comics reach so many people? Were they, like, accessible to everyone?
That's a key part of the story. Mexican comics were, for the most part, super affordable. Cheap paper, often black and white, kept the cost down.
Not just for the elite, then.
Nope. They were everywhere. Newsstands, markets, street corners, part of everyday life.
Almost like public art. Everyone could enjoy it.
I like that. And that meant these stories, characters, ideas, they could reach everyone, no matter how much money they had or how much education.
Incredible. It truly made these powerful stories available to everyone. But with all this talk about social impact, did Mexican comics ever avoid touchy subjects?
Interesting question. It shows how diverse and complex Mexican comics were. Some definitely pushed the limits, while others were more careful, maybe trying to appeal to a broader audience or avoid getting censored.
It's like walking a tightrope between saying what you want and staying within the lines.
Exactly. And we got to remember, Mexican comics, like any media, they were influenced by the political and social climate of the time.
So there wasn't just one kind of Mexican comic, just like there wasn't just one Mexican experience.
Absolutely. Romance, adventure, superheroes, funny animals, they had it all.
Yeah.
And each genre had its own way of reflecting and shaping Mexican society.
Shows you how rich and varied this art form really is. But with all this richness and depth, what's next for Mexican comics?
Ah, the big question, especially in this digital age, right? How will they adapt as technology changes? Will they keep their unique identity? Will they find new readers?
So many possibilities. It's like we're on the edge of a whole new chapter in Mexican comic book history.
We are, and that's something we're going to explore more right after this. Stick with us.
All right, we're back and ready to tackle the future of Mexican comics. It's like we've traveled through time, you know, from those cigarette pack comics to the rise of Calman, La Familia Buron, and now we're stepping into a whole new era.
Definitely a time of exciting potential with tech changing how comics work everywhere, not just in Mexico.
So like a digital revolution for Mexican comics, is that what we're talking about?
Yeah, you could say that. Digital distribution, it's breaking down borders. Mexican comics can reach a global audience now in ways we couldn't even picture just a few decades ago.
It's like these stories are finally getting out there, reaching the whole world.
Exactly. And then you have webcomics. That's another huge change. Creators have more freedom, more control. They can try new formats, styles. It's amazing.
Yeah, like a new generation of storytellers coming up, not limited by the old ways of doing things.
Exactly. And it's fueling this wave of creativity, artists tackling current issues, different viewpoints, really pushing the limits of what comics can do.
Now, I got to ask, with all this change, are traditional print comics, like, going extinct?
That's the question, isn't it? Digital is definitely growing, but I don't think print is going away completely. There's something special about holding a comic in your hand, the feel of the paper, turning the pages, seeing the art the way it was meant to be seen.
Yeah, like a connection to the history of these stories.
Right, and don't forget about the collectors. For a lot of people, those old comics, they're precious. They remind them of their childhood. They're a piece of history you can hold.
I get it. They're like a time capsule of those cultural moments. But even if print survives, how do Mexican comics keep their unique flavor in this digital world? How do they not get, like, swallowed up by global trends?
Tough question, right? It's about using new technology but staying true to your roots. One way is to blend the old with the new, I think.
What do you mean?
Well, picture this. A comic with hand-drawn art, but the colors and special effects are digital. Or a web comic inspired by those classic Mexican characters and stories, but updated for today's readers.
Finding that balance, respecting the past, but embracing the future.
Exactly. And we'll see more experimentation with genres, storytelling, all that. Mexican comics have always drawn from different sources. Indigenous mythology, American superheroes, all kinds of stuff. Now imagine mixing that with anime, manga, even video games.
Wow, the possibilities are endless.
They really are, and it's exciting to think about how these new kinds of comics might reach new audiences in Mexico and around the world.
It's like Mexican comics are ready to go global,
Yeah.
sharing their unique mix of humor, drama, and social commentary with everyone.
I think so. It shows the lasting power of these stories, these characters, and what they tell us about Mexican life and culture.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into the world of Mexican comics, I'm kind of amazed by how creative and resilient this art form is. From those little cigarette pack comics to this digital revolution happening now, Mexican comics have captured the heart of a nation. They show us its struggles, its triumphs, its changing identity. And as we head into this unknown future, who knows what incredible stories are waiting to be told?
It's a journey worth taking, definitely. I encourage everyone listening to explore Mexican comics, dive into the classics, discover the new webcomics, see how this amazing art form is evolving right before our eyes.
It's an invitation to explore a world of imagination where you find humor and heartbreak, social commentary that sparks conversation, and the human spirit shining through in all its messy glory. So until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep into the stories that shape our world.